Bonsoir à tous. Bonsoir à tous. Merci d'être avec nous ce soir. On est super content de vous accueillir pour la troisième édition de notre Meetup. Bon, je fais l'accueil, on fait l'accueil en français, mais on va vite basculer sur l'anglais, puisque ce soir, on accueille Harrison, donc Harrison Chase, qui est le CEO et cofondateur de LangChain. Voilà, il va nous faire une session sur LangSmith. Important, si vous souhaitez poser des questions, vous pouvez utiliser la section Q&A qui est donc dans le panel. Et puis, sinon, l'idée c'est plutôt de vous laisser profiter de cette session. Est-ce que tu veux ajouter?
Maybe for our English speakers, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section and not in the general chat, please.
Sure. And so now we will let Harrison go on with his pitch. So thank you very much, Harrison, to be with us tonight. We're really happy to be able to host this event. Well, the floor is yours.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I heard there was a really good one of these a few months ago where my friend Thomas from L'Oreal spoke, and so sad to miss that, but happy to be here. My name is Harrison Chase. I'm the CEO and co-founder of LangChain. I'll talk a bunch more about what we do, but at a high level, we build developer tooling to help people, developers in particular, build LLM-based applications. And there's a few different components of what form that takes. And so I have some slides for a talk that I'd love to run through at a high level. And then also wanted to show off some of LangSmith, which is the platform I'll be talking a bunch about. And then also would love to take any and all kind of like questions as well. So yeah, it looks like there's a chat and a Q&A box up on the top. So happy to answer any questions in there. Let me share my screen. All right, so hopefully you can see this. So yeah, the company I started is called LangChain, and I'll be talking about a lot of the stuff that we are working on today. So I think, starting a year and a half ago, roughly, LLMs became a thing, and people started wanting to build applications on top of them. And there's been a kind of like journey that we see a lot of builders, whether they be startups or enterprises, go on. And so there's some initial kind of like, exploration and curiosity, and like, what do we even build? And then from there, it's okay, we've got this idea. How do we create a prototype of that? And then after that, you create the prototype, there's a very long journey to go to kind of like get it into production. And so LangChain, the open source project, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, was really built around the idea of the first two, how to help people have inspiration, get ideas, and easily build out prototypes of applications. And then LangChain, the company, is all about this whole journey. So that the open source and all of that is a huge component of that. But everything around quality and building trust in an application is also a major focus of ours. And we identified that pretty early on as a really tough thing that people are trying to overcome. And so we've built some tooling that's probably less known, and so I want to talk a lot about that as well. So generally, this is about LangChain, the open source, and about just the space of the LLM ecosystem in general. I would say the most exciting thing that we see people doing with LLMs is not just using them by themselves, but rather connecting them to external sources of data or computation. And so on the data side, retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, has kind of like emerged as a really popular technique here. And that's basically combining LLMs with other kind of like text data, and allowing for question answering and chat applications over your private documents data, or over search engines as well. So Perplexity is a great example of something you can build using these techniques. And then the other big aspect of this is maybe not connecting it to data, but rather using tools and using APIs. And so ever from the start, LangChain has really been aimed at facilitating the usage of APIs, and getting LLMs to call APIs and invoke APIs, and basically allowing language models to interact with existing software systems. And so this is really a lot of this is the core focus of LangChain, and so we've built a lot of tooling to help out with that. So a lot of tooling around language models, obviously. So we have 60 plus different language model providers, different prompt templates and prompt templating techniques, different output parsers, so way of taking the response from the language model and parsing it into a structured format, and then a lot of integrations and techniques around the data and tools. So we have things like document loaders and text splitters and vector stores and retrievers that are all for interacting with unstructured data, which has been this massive unlock. And then we also have 100, 200 different tools, whether it be like the Wikipedia API or the Google Search API that developers can easily use and interact with. In addition to all of this, we also have kind of like a layer above, a bunch of easy to get started with examples and templates, and these two things really satisfy the first two bullet points in the journey that I mapped out above. So making it easy to get started, we aim to have a ton of different tutorials and cookbooks and how-to guides, and basically give people that spark of imagination of what's possible. And then for building that prototype, we aim to have everything where it's very easy to get started off the shelf, and then also customize it. And so this has been a big focus of ours over the past 6 months. I won't talk about that as much during this talk, but there's a lot of changes that we've made even from last summer that makes LangChain a lot more customizable and flexible. And we see this being crucial for kind of like going into production with these applications. And this is how we think about LangChain, LangChain, the framework. So there's the open source package, or now packages. As we've grown, we've re-architected the package and split it into a few different packages for modularity and best practice and hygiene. But there's the open source packages, which make it really easy to get started. There's then kind of like a layer above this, which is when it comes time to deploy it, what's the best way to deploy it? And so we've introduced some templates, and then also LangServe, which is a wrapper around Fast API, basically. And then you'll notice this LangSmith thing running all throughout, running vertically. And this is tooling that we've worked on that's not open source, but it's really aimed at helping people get from the prototyping at the most basic level all the way to deployment as quickly as possible. And so that's a lot of what I want to talk through today, because I think that's where there is a lot of the most challenges that we see people running into. And so there's three main kind of like modes that people use LangSmith in. The first I would classify it as prototyping. So when you're just getting started with an idea, and want to see what's possible, there's certain ways that you can use LangSmith. Then there's like a beta testing kind of like stage where you've got something, you've deployed it, but it's maybe like deployed to a few internal users or a small number of traffic or something like that. And then there's production, when you're running it in production scale for many users. And a lot of the features can be used in multiple of these, but I've tried to break them into these three different categories just for simplicity and fun. Starting with, I think the thing that's the most obvious and clear kind of like value add of LangSmith is just debugging what's going on inside your application. So and to be clear, LangSmith works whether you use LangChain or not. And it's really aimed, again, whether you're using LangChain or not, at these like multi-step complex kind of like applications where there's multiple LLM calls, or maybe like an LLM call and some tool calls, and they're interspersed. And oftentimes where the order of those calls isn't even known ahead of time. And those would be more like agent-like things, to use a buzzword. And so this is where debugging is super, super crucial and important. So debugging lets you see like what exactly is happening inside your application, which again, if you're letting an agent run, having that observability is just crucial. And then it also lets you see what the inputs and outputs at each step are. And that's really important. Even if you're using just like a single LLM call, there's still probably a lot of context that you're gathering from RAG or from other sources that you're putting into the prompt. And so being able to see like what exactly the prompt looks like by the time it's fully formatted is really, really important. Being able to see the exact output of the LLM, super important. And just having that visibility, we've found really lets people just understand what's going on inside the application. If you're using LangChain, you can start using this by just setting one environment variable. And so it's really, really quick and easy to see that like immediate value add. The other big component of LangSmith besides observability, and you'll probably notice two main themes as I talk. One's around observability. The second's around like testing and evaluation. So we hear this has been a pain point for developers for over a year. Ever since people started building testing these language model applications is very different than software testing. When you might write unit tests for software, but here you've got one like the output is very different than a typical software program. It's a long piece of text usually. And the metrics of how you'd evaluate it are very different from a software program. You may not be able to do kind of like, asserts equals or something like that. And so testing is a huge component of where we've invested energy in LangSmith. And the starting point for a lot of people in testing is just creating an initial test set. And so these would be examples of inputs and optionally outputs that basically represent, you can almost think of these as each one of these data points is a unit test. And you're going to test your application over these unit tests, and you want to test them over a bunch of different data points because there's so many different potential like things that could happen with your application based on the inputs. And so yeah, evaluation is super important. The first step of that is creating this initial test set. We let you do that by uploading existing examples, creating them in the UI, or there's other methods. I think one of them will show up in a slide below. But basically gather and curate this testing data set. This comparison view is also part of this testing theme. So especially when you're prototyping, you're probably running a few different models, or you're running a few different prompts or a few different retrieval strategies, and you're doing a lot of prototyping, you're doing a lot of experimentation. And so being able to see different experiments side by side is really important. And so we've added kind of like a comparison view where you can easily kind of like see the outputs of two different experiments, compare them, see where one's doing better than the other, easily dive into those data points, and basically enable this quick prototyping and quick comparison. So the playground is something that we added to help with the debugging and observability aspect. So once you have the logs of all your traces that are coming in, a lot of these traces have to do with language models, and a lot of these, as I said, are generally a prompt filled up with context that's accumulated over time. And the place where a lot of these applications mess up and make mistakes is in a call to a language model. And so you want to be able to debug that call. And in order to do that, you need to know the inputs and outputs at that exact state. And so great, the tracing and logging shows you that. But then it's also really nice to just be able to enter into a playground with that prompt in the UI. And so I'll show a demo of LangSmith, and it might make it more clear later on. But essentially what this looks like is you can immediately go from a log to a playground of that prompt at that exact point in time. And so you can very quickly kind of like change the prompt, change the input variables, change the model, change the temperature, see what's going on, play around with it there. And so this also enables pretty rapid kind of like prototyping and experimentation. Moving on to beta testing. And so this is when you've released the app to maybe some internal users or a small subset. The main thing that we see people wanting to do here is collect feedback. And because that's probably the main reason to do some sort of beta testing. You want to collect feedback and see how your app is doing. And so we allow people to easily attach any types of feedback, whether it be kind of like thumbs up, thumbs down, like 1 out of 5 ranking, text kind of like corrections or anything like that. You can easily attach it to traces. And then you can filter based on that, and you can easily view the data points that have these feedback. And I can't emphasize enough how important collecting this feedback is. This will let you really start to get it. It'll let you figure out whether your app is working at all. It will let you start to build up the data flywheel over time. Similarly, sometimes you can't always get enough feedback from users, and so it might be necessary to have some internal team members annotate data that's flowing through the system. And so this annotation is really helpful because basically it gets you to look at data points and leave leave feedback. And so it's just another form of collecting feedback. And so we've invested in an annotation queue, a really simple UI where you can easily cycle through traces and give it a score, give it some feedback that you can then start to track over time or use in some way. So this is going to be just thought of as a way of facilitating kind of like feedback that your internal team is leaving and giving. And so another important part of beta testing is taking data points that you see coming into production and using those to update the data set, the testing data set, or a data set in general that you created earlier. And so I mentioned that there's a few ways to create these data sets. One of the main ways that we see people doing it is adding runs to this data set from your production traffic. And so this is important because you oftentimes don't know how people are going to use your application. And so seeing their inputs or their questions and then adding those immediately to a data set is really nice for building this up over time. Once you're in production, I think it becomes important to look at things at scale. And so this is where monitoring and some A/B testing like things come into play. So we track a bunch of metrics by default, a bunch of LLM related metrics. So latency, time to first token, number of tokens used, cost, the obvious kind of like just number of queries, feedback over time. And so you can see this chart over time, and then you can also drill into specific areas. So if you see that there's a drop in feedback or something, you can click in and you can immediately see kind of like what's going on in that time period. So I think the important thing to call out here is just the high-level overview that monitoring provides, and then also that drill-in ability that you can do when you want to inspect specific points. And I think that is the last slide. And so now I'm gonna switch over and actually show off a lot of these features in LangSmith. So if you don't already have a LangSmith account, you can sign up for free. It's smith.langchain.com. You can have you automatically get a personal account, and you can set up organizational accounts. I'm going to go to the LangChain Inc. organization account. I have a bunch of different projects, and so these are basically logs from traces. And let me make my window a little bit larger because there's oftentimes a lot of information on the screen. So these are basically different tracing and logging projects. I've got my data sets and tests here. I've got my annotation queue where I can review stuff here. And then I've got my prompt hub here. And so this wasn't on the slides, but we also have a prompt hub, which basically is a collection of prompts that you can version. So for projects, I can click in. We have Chat LangChain. So Chat LangChain, if you haven't used it, let me actually go to it. It's a RAG retrieval augmented generation application that answers questions about LangChain's documentation. So I can ask it a question. I can see it start to stream back stuff. I can see the sources it retrieved. I can see the answer here. I can leave feedback. This is all open source. So this is all on an open source repo. So if you want to play around with it, if you want to use this on some other data, I'd highly encourage you to check this out. And it's hooked up to LangSmith by default. And so it's hooked up to this project. And so I think this was my most recent run. So I can click in and see exactly what's going on. And so if I look at the most relevant things, I can see that there's kind of like two main steps here. There's retrieve docs, where I retrieve some documents. And then there's this generate response, where I generate a response. And so if I look at retrieve docs, the main thing that's happening here is I have this call to a retriever. So I can see the exact input to the retriever, which is this query string. And then I can see the outputs. So these are all these documents. I can click into it. I can see like what exactly this document is. and inspect it easily there. Then in this generate response, I have this call to a language model. So I can click in here and I can see the exact input. And so this is the system message with all the prompts, with all the context already stuffed into it. It's the human message. And then I can see the output from the language model as well. If I want to play around, I can now go into the playground from here. And I can easily change any part of this. I can change the model, temperature, things like that, rerun it, and kind of like see the edits. Other things I can do from here, so I can share this. So this is super helpful if I want to share this with, if you want to share this with the LangChain team. If you run into an error and want to share a trace with the team, you can click share. It creates a publicly shareable kind of like link that you can share. You can also add this to a data set. And so this is what I was talking about before, where you can add this to a data set. In this case, let me actually go back to maybe this input output and add this to a data set. I can see that the input is this question and this chat history. There's no previous conversation, so that's why nothing's showing up. And then the output's this. I could choose a data set to add this to if I wanted to. And I can also annotate it. So I can open up this annotation panel, and I can leave feedback. These are existing tags that we have feedback for in the system, but I can also add a new tag if I wanted to, and I can create. It looks like we have a lot of these, so I can create a new tag and add one there. I can add notes, and then I can also view feedback. So if you remember, I clicked the thumbs up. That's logged as a user score with score 1, and from the API. There's no correction, and yeah. So this is kind of like the tracing view. I can also view actually one maybe small thing to show before that. We'll also have this threads view, which is basically where you can see conversations over time. So this is like the full conversations that's happened, and so this is basically just grouping traces together. So that's often very handy for viewing conversations because there are often a lot of conversations. In the monitoring tab, this is where I can see kind of like activity over time. So here I can see that we've had a big increase in kind of like the number of traces. I can zoom in or out. So if I go to 30 days, I can zoom out, and I can see that it's actually jumped up a bunch in the past like 2 weeks or so. I can see a bunch of other metrics. I can see tokens per second. I can see that it's actually gotten there's been more tokens per second. I can see the average scores over time. So I can see that it's gotten more and more vague over time. And other related metrics. And the cool thing I can do here is I can group these metrics by metadata. So one of the things that we do in Chat LangChain, if you remember, you can choose the language model that you're using. So you can choose between these 5. So in LangSmith, I can now group all these metrics by those different LLMs. And so I can see that we've actually had a really big increase in, it looks like this is OpenAI recently. And before that, there was a big increase in people using Anthropic. I can go in, I can see that, okay, Cohere had some failed calls here. I can look at the latency and I can see that, OpenAI and Fireworks are pretty kind of like tight at the bottom. And then there's been some other, there's some other providers that are getting a little bit slower or just like not as performant over time. And so I can really do some like A/B testing and compare things there. I think those are the main features, and the setup for this is super simple. The setup, you just set kind of like your API key and you set like the LangChain project, and then you're all set up and ready to go. Showing off some of the other things that I mentioned, maybe I'll just jump to the testing and data set for time, because I know I've already been talking for, it looks like about 20-25 minutes. Jumping to data sets and testing, one of the things that you can do is, let's see here, you can basically, so this shows off basically experiments and examples. So examples are just inputs and outputs. So here I have some text and I have a label like not toxic. I can go to the next one. I can see that I have and that's not toxic. So basically these are inputs and outputs. What I can also see is the performance over time of some experiments that I'm running. So I can see charts and I can see which ones I want to track over time. So maybe I want to also see error rate over time, and I can see it jump up. I can also click into these specific runs and see what's going on. So let me maybe select these two. I can select one or I can select three if I want, but let me select these two and let me enter comparison mode. And so in here, I get a more kind of like focused comparison of just these two runs. So I can see the average score of these two combined. I can see the distribution combined, and then I can also see the inputs and outputs for each run. So this is the input. This is the true reference output, and then I can see the outputs of these two runs, as well as like these labels. And so these labels are feedback that's left by an evaluator. And so basically, in the way of thinking about evaluations and data sets is you have the data, and then you have the evaluators. And so here I'm just using a simple kind of like correctness evaluator. If I want to, I can also do things like I can filter for where correctness equals 1 here, and where correctness equals 1 there, and here where correctness equals 0. And I can drill into runs. It looks like this one's always better, so let me reverse that. All right, so now here I can see places where the true label is toxic. The first one got it right. Oh, but it's marked as incorrect for some reason. Interesting. Okay, so now here is where I can open the run and see like what exactly is going on and why that might be left as incorrect. I can also see that I'm using this correctness evaluator, and I can actually view the evaluation run. And so I can see that I'm using a language model to do this correctness. And so interestingly, for some reason, and this is, I'll talk about our roadmap in a second, but we can see that here, like I had this thing, I called ChatGPT and it actually returned correctness to be false. And I can see that here, that comes as this part of this is doing some tool calling. If I replay this, let's see if it works. Yeah, so for some reason, this is saying it is false. I don't exactly know why. So here, this is the prompt I'm using to grade it, right? So let me just like think step by step here, rerun it. It's still saying it's false for some reason. Maybe I open up my function description. So you can see some live prompt engineering. Okay, so now it's true. So now I know that I need to update this. This, I think, wasn't saved as like an evaluator, but if it was, I could save it automatically from here. Yeah, so this shows off some of the perils of using LLM-based evaluation, but I'm still very bullish on LLM-based evaluation as a whole. I'll maybe take a few more minutes to talk about some of the things that we are working on, and then I'll take any questions because I see that there's a bunch in the chat. I think there's three main things that we're focused on as a company at this moment in time. It obviously changes rapidly given the space. First, we're investing a lot in making LangChain, the current open source, more production ready and maintainable and clean. So specific things we're doing here are working with integration partners to create dedicated packages for their integration. We're standardizing different names of the different models and vector stores. We're moving a lot of the core abstractions, continuing to move them into core. We're cleaning up some of the deprecated methods, or we're adding deprecation warnings to a lot of the old methods because things have evolved. And we're investing heavily in documentation. The second main thing we're working on is everything around LangGraph. So LangGraph is an extension of LangChain that's specifically aimed at agents and multi-agent workflows, but it's aimed at that by letting you create a highly specific and highly controllable graphical representation of an agent. Let me actually share my screen for this. So I'll just go to the LangGraph repo. This is all open source. Let me look at an example. Let me pull up a cool example that we have. I think the plan and execute one is a cool one. So basically, like in here, we're creating this like planning agent that specifically does like a plan, then generates tasks, then executes on those tasks, then updates the state with the task results, and then decides whether to replan or to respond to the user. And so this is like this is a very specific workflow, and we can see that it's pretty easy to create. So here this is basically the definition of the agent. We have this state of the agent that we track, and so if we go up to plan and execute, this is just a Pydantic model, which we can see here. And so we can see that we're tracking the input, the plan, the past steps, and then the response. And so we can define an arbitrary state that we're tracking for our agent. We're then adding an agent step. We're then adding a replan step. We're adding a planner step, and then we always start with the planner. After the planner, we go to the agent. After the agent, we go to the replan, and then after replan, we either end or we go back to the agent. And so and then you just compile it, and then you can call it as you would with any other kind of like LangChain object. And so here we're stringing out some of the different steps at each node. So you can see the plan, you can see the past steps now get added in, and you can see the response down here, and so you can see what's going on. And so that's the second main area that we're investing in. And then the third main area that we're investing in is really heavily around testing and evaluation in LangSmith. So we continue to see that testing and evaluation is really, really crucial for moving quickly. Basically, you can't move quickly unless you can measure how well your application is doing and whether it's getting better. And so you need good testing and good evaluation to do that. So a few things on the roadmap here are some cleanups to make it even more clear whether kind of like you're improving or regressing when you experiment with a new prompt or a new model. And then also integrations with some open source projects like Ragos, which are really specifically aimed at evaluating RAG and some other things like that. And so that's kind of like what's on our roadmap for the next few months. That pretty much concludes my long monologue, and I see that there's some questions in the Q&A, so maybe I can take those, and happy to take however many we have time for.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's basically up to you, kind of. Just maybe I will just well, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. The most upvoted question used to be, will this be recorded? It is, and it will be available soon. So maybe Julia, if you want
Yes,
to.
I will read the most upvoted question. So Hugo is asking, most of my French clients refuse to use LangSmith since data is sent to American GCP data center. Do you have any updates about the possibility to self-host LangSmith?
Yeah, so a few updates, some more short-term than long-term. So it is currently possible to self-host LangSmith. It is just a little bit more involved, so it generally comes as part of like an enterprise contract, but most of our large enterprise customers are doing that. We are working on things to make that a little bit easier, which should make it more feasible. So we are working on getting in the Azure marketplace so you can procure it and self-host it through Azure. And then we're also experimenting with some different kind of like deployment options to make that more feasible. But that last thing is longer term.
All right, thank you. Can LangChain provide us with determinism in LLM results to validate tests or for legal purposes, e.g. absence of bias, possibly with LangSmith? And I would add, maybe you probably have heard of it, but in the European Union, we have this regulation that all companies will have to comply with, the AI Act. So are you working on making LangSmith AI Act proof, or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think the way that I would suggest doing this is basically is testing for it with LangSmith. And so writing tests for determinism, absence of bias, We will probably add a few off-the-shelf ones, and maybe some of those will be related to the AI Act. That's on our roadmap that we haven't gotten to. But yeah, the way that I would approach this is you test for this with LangSmith, and then the way that you fix this, in so much as it can be fixed for the start, is probably some combination of kind of like prompt engineering or safe checks or guardrails or something. And we have a bunch of integrations in LangChain with different guardrails packages. Prompt engineering, obviously, you can do kind of like within LangChain as well. So I'd say like you fix this within LangChain, but the main tools that we'll provide is this testing framework to help you test and share the results of those tests and collaborate on those tests.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you for the detailed answer. I think it helps a lot our audience. The next question is from Jules. Hello. Oh, yes, sorry. It is possible to track the consumption generated by LLMs via LangSmith.
And if I just can add a little detail, consumption in terms of FinOps, but maybe also in terms of GreenOps. Many of our French companies we work with are really concerned as well by the environmental impact, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. We don't have kind of like anything around GreenOps yet. That's interesting. For sure, I'll have to take that back to the team. We do track kind of like cost over time for specific models right now, and we're working on adding more. So we do track that. The not GreenOps not yet though. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so next question is from Jules. Hello, I have struggled to ingest complex PDF with out-of-the-box LangChain's PDF ingester. Is there an integration I don't know that enhance this part of the workflow for RAG construction? We got out of LangSmith here, but
No, this is good. Yeah, this is the questions about LangChain are great as well. PDF parsing is really hard. We have, I don't even know what our out-of-the-box PDF ingester is because I think we have like 5 or 10 different integrations. I think the one that if you're struggling with specific aspects, the one that I'd recommend taking a close look at is unstructured. So unstructured provides a lot more flexibility around how the PDF is parsed. They spent a lot of time specifically on PDF parsing, getting different attributes out. We have a bunch of really tight integrations with them. I'd highly recommend checking out unstructured if you need kind of like detailed PDF parsing.
Thank you for taking this question. Next one is about integration with cloud providers like GCP. Is LangChain easily integrated with them?
Yeah, we integrate with GCP on a bunch of different fronts. So like, you know, if you have a model or if you have a database hosted on GCP, we can integrate that way. But then we also make it really easy to deploy on GCP as well. So LangServe, I think, so Tomas from L'Oreal actually talked about this at Google Next. I think the title was Deploying LangServe on Cloud Run. And so, yeah, we have, we use, internally, we use GCP a bunch. And so that's kind of one of the platforms that we have the most documentation for. But I think with Azure, we also have a deployment option for Azure. So specifically, if you're talking about deploying LangChain on these cloud providers, if you check out the LangServe repo, we have documentation for all the major ones.
Okay, perfect. What are the next planned evolutions for LangSmith in the short and medium term? I know you told us about the whole LangChain ecosystem. Maybe if we can have a bit more details on LangSmith.
Yeah, LangSmith short term is really focused on testing. So testing and evaluation is the main kind of like action item there. We're adding a few features that I think are going to be pretty cool and coming out in the next few weeks. And then we're also doing a lot of education and kind of like tutorials on testing and evaluation. In the medium term, I think, and long term, I think one of the big goals that we want to push for is to really get help people get like this data flywheel kind of like started, where you see data coming in from production, you get feedback on that in some form, you then maybe move that into a data set which you use as like few shot examples or fine tuning. So starting to go into this data flywheel, whether by few shot examples or fine tuning, is probably a medium to long term thing.
Thank you for sharing your vision for the product. There is another question. Getting started with LangChain can be a bit overwhelming sometimes. Is there a path one can follow to go from zero to production level app provided by LangChain, a paid course paid on days?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of the challenge is that there's so many different types of apps that you can build with LangChain. It's not like we have kind of like one tutorial. A few things that I'd say here. One, we're actively working on kind of like improving our documentation, and a big focus of that will be on these end-to-end deploy production-ready tutorials with LangChain. And then the second thing I'd add is we don't have any courses ourselves, but we do a bunch of courses with deep learning AI, which I think are pretty good, and they're now on Udemy as well. And so I'd recommend checking those out as a place to get started.
All right, thank you. Next question. Do you see the Crew AI framework as similar or complementary to LangGraph?
I think both in some sense. Like I think similar in that both kind of like deal with agents, but I think it's actually a very different approach. So I know Zhao, and Zhao's great, and I think Crew AI, it's actually built on top of LangChain, and I think it just takes a different approach. Crew AI is like very easy to get started with. I think it's very accessible. He's done a fantastic job at kind of like tutorials. And I think it's a little bit higher level than LangGraph. So one of the main criticisms of LangGraph that we've heard is that it's too low level, and you need to think about things as a graph and with edges. And I think Crew AI does a great job of just letting you think about things as kind of like different agents that make up a crew. I think the same thing is also the pro of LangGraph, though. So I think teams that we see using LangGraph generally use it for its controllability. And in some cases you need that, and in some cases you don't. So in that sense, I'd say they're kind of complementary in that they solve kind of like two different pain points or two different sets of users.
Thank you for answering. Next question from Olivier. Is graph data exportable to enable their integration into a third-party product like Grafana, for instance, to monitor alerts or thresholds?
I'm not entirely sure what this means. If this is talking about LangSmith data, then it's exportable in the sense like everything's API first, so you can export some data there. If it's talking about LangGraph data and some of the things there, the persistence we have for LangGraph is kind of like it's all open source, so we have some open source integrations. I don't know. I don't think there's any integrations for Grafana for LangGraph, but everything's open source. Not entirely sure if I answered that question correctly, but tried to.
Well, you got a thumb up, so probably. Can you still stay with us like 5 minutes to answer a few more questions, or are you short on time?
No, 5 minutes is great. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So, and I think this question is quite interesting. When loading a scanned PDF, is there a solution in LangChain? I suppose we're here talking about data preparation, OCR, and things like that.
I think my answer to this would be similar to the one before. I'd recommend checking out Unstructured. We have a bunch of integrations with them. There's probably a few other integrations that we have, but Unstructured is probably the one that I'd recommend checking out there.
Right.
Thank you very much. Next question is, what about Thoughtworks putting LangChain on hold in their latest radar? Any thoughts on it or impact on the roadmap?
I don't actually know what ThoughtWorks is or what the radar is or what hold is. So I guess I'm not equipped to answer this question. I'll look into it. I'll look into it.
You have to check it out. I think it's a consulting firm, very specialized in innovation and things like that. Next question from Didier. Is there a function that allows the detection of potentially harmful questions and answers? The content could be blocked based on the probability that it is harmful.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have some integrations here. We actually wrote a for different things. I think that harmful can mean different things depending on the application and depending on the industry and depending on the use case. But we do have a bunch of integrations with Microsoft Presidio, some of the AWS services. We actually worked with Ally Bank, a financial institution, to add some guardrails around some answers, mostly for regulatory reasons. So we do have a bunch of guardrails AI we have an integration with. So we do have a bunch of integrations for various things here. This is something where we're very happy to work with partners on.
Thank you. Next question from David. Can we expect to see LangSmith on other cloud providers like our European, Scaleway, Clever Cloud, OVH Cloud, others?
Yeah, at some point, yes, but our first priority is getting into the Azure Marketplace, which we've actually done and will announce sometime soon. And then after that, I think it's AWS and Google, and then after that, we'll see. We're still a small team I mean, we're 25 people total, about half on LangSmith, half on open source. So we're trying our best.
An anonymous question. Hi, I'm a beginner in NLP. Can you tell us what kind of techniques you recommend to prepare structured training data to fine-tune LLMs?
Yeah, I think I mean, first I would say like the need to fine tune LLMs is actually going down drastically as the API based models get better and better, and as the foundation models get better and better. If you do need to fine tune models, generally what I'd recommend doing, I mean, one really easy way to prepare data for this is to use an off the shelf model and use that to answer a bunch of incoming questions to start, and then basically track all those responses in LangSmith, export them into some data file, and then basically fine tune kind of like a student model to mimic that teacher model. Other than that, I mean, it really depends on the application and like what the data format should look like, where you can gather it from. Is it going to be synthetic, or can you get humans to label it? I don't know if there's a general purpose solution, so I don't know if I have a great answer to that.
Thank you. I think it definitely helps. One last question from Philip. It's difficult to propose pull requests. I propose to make transformers compatible with Runnable, but I have no feedback. Do you think you could improve this?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Philippe, for all the contributions to LangChain. I recognize the name for sure. Yeah, this is something we are trying to get better at. I think yeah, I think not only pull requests, but I'd also say like issues and discussion items on GitHub are something that I don't think we've done an amazing job at responding to. This is in part just due to the sheer volume of them and the size of the team that we have. I think we have about half a team on open source, and then about half that is on JS, and then the other half's on Python. We are trying to get better. We're trying to work with integration partners to have them handle more of PRs related to their integration, so that we can focus on core PRs like the one you mentioned. We are hiring to add more people to help with that. So we're
All right, thank you, Harrison. So our session is getting to the end, so we're going to have to conclude. Still, there are many questions in the Q&A section. So thank you very much to everyone for contributing to this discussion. Really interesting questions. If you want, Harrison, we can export them, send the questions to you and if you can answer them afterwards, it would be awesome. We could even just launch a follow-up session with just the Q&A, but we'll see that later on. Anyways, thank you very much for being here. I think it's really important for us as we're starting all of this community around people building LLMs enabled apps, and we're many here working with this framework. That is a great boost, a great accelerator for many of us. So it's really been a pleasure.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And yeah, if you like, I'll try to be available on Twitter and hopefully on GitHub more. If people have any questions or want to reach out, please do. Yeah, it's fun times.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe just so to wrap up the session, a bit like last meetup, we prepared a little slide with the latest news. Do we keep on in English or do we switch to
I think we can,
French?
We can stay in English.
English
Yeah.
it is. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, your turn.
Yes. So I will start with NVIDIA. Okay, so I have a request to switch in French. Donc, si on remonte en mars, il y avait la conférence GTC de NVIDIA où ils ont présenté leur nouvelle architecture GPU Blackwell, donc les Upper Next. On pensait que c'était une news intéressante à remonter depuis le dernier meetup. Il y a eu aussi pas mal de nouveautés, notamment du côté de Google. Marie, je ne sais pas si tu veux ajouter quelque chose là-dessus.
Oui, bah alors forcément beaucoup d'annonces pendant le Cloud Next la semaine dernière, beaucoup d'annonces autour de Gemini et de Gemini 1.5, et puis une autre annonce qui a retenu notre attention, c'est le partenariat avec Stack Overflow pour aussi tout le tooling pour les développeurs et avec assisté du LLM. C'est difficile de revenir au français au final. Voilà, toujours dans l'univers des modèles, on peut parler de Grok.
Oui, on a donc la version 1.5 multimodale qui est maintenant disponible. On a eu
donc Grok, qui est le modèle de
XAI, donc de Elon Musk. On a eu aussi la nouvelle version de GPT-4 Turbo fin mars, si je dis pas de bêtises, et les nouveaux modèles version 3 de Claude d'Anthropic. Ça, c'est au niveau des sorties. Sur tout ce qui est rapport, on a eu le rapport AI 50 de Sequoia Capital qui nous a semblé intéressant puisque LangChain est mentionné parmi les orchestrateurs.
Alors autant peut-être qu'il est on hold sur le tech radar de Southwark, autant dans le AI 50, donc qui est le rapport qui ressort les 50 sociétés les plus importantes, enfin considérées comme étant les plus importantes de l'écosystème AI par Forbes, Sequoia. Bien on retrouve LangChain, et LangChain comme au final seul acteur à ce niveau-là dans cette catégorie orchestrateur, ce qui montre quand même voilà sa place importante. Et pour l'instant également au final le fait qu'il y ait assez peu d'alternatives de la même envergure.
Il y avait également une étude d'Harvard Business Review sur les usages de l'IA générative avec pour 2 usages principaux l'assistance technique et le troubleshooting et la génération de contenu qu'on a trouvé intéressant de vous remonter et qu'on vous invite à lire si vous voulez en savoir plus. Et après côté nomination, on a eu la nomination d'Andrew Ng au Board of Directors chez Amazon, qui a fait beaucoup de bruit, ainsi que tout ce qui s'est passé avec Inflection et Microsoft. Peut-être tu peux revenir dessus.
Oui, en tout cas la nomination de Mustapha Suleyman, qui était donc cofondateur de DeepMind et également qui est cofondateur d'Inflection AI. Donc Inflection AI, c'est l'entreprise qui est derrière, par exemple, Pi, un petit assistant personnel. Et donc Mustapha Suleyman rejoint les équipes de Microsoft pour diriger Copilot. Voilà, c'est aussi intéressant de voir ce qui se passe du côté un peu mercato des talents. On voit qu'il y a encore beaucoup de mouvements et des mouvements importants parce que voilà, des personnalités comme Mustapha Suleyman ou Andrew Ng en effet sont des poids lourds du secteur. Et c'est peu de le dire. Donc voilà un petit peu notre mash-up des dernières actualités. On va s'arrêter ici pour la session de ce soir. Voilà, on espère vraiment que vous en retirerez des choses intéressantes pour avancer voilà, sur vos sujets respectifs. On a aussi essayé de laisser un peu plus de place aux questions. On sait que sur les sessions précédentes, on n'avait pas eu la possibilité de poser beaucoup de questions.
Et puis, oui, on a bien pris note de vos remarques et pour cet événement-là également, vous aurez la possibilité de nous donner notre qu'on appréciera beaucoup. Ça nous permet de nous améliorer pour les prochaines éditions.
Voilà, il nous reste plus qu'à vous dire merci à tous de nous avoir rejoints. On espère vous voir au prochain. Les annonces ne sont pas encore.
Oui, c'est pas encore.
On n'est pas encore ready à vous dévoiler tout le programme. Mais voilà. Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée à tous.
Merci à tous. Bonne soirée.